Chapter 21. The Eye of the Snake. Hermione plowed her way back to Hagrid's cabin through 2 feet of snow on Sunday morning. Harry and Ron wanted to go with her, but their mountain of homework had reached an alarming height again, so they grudgingly remained in the common room, trying to ignore the gleeful shots drifting up from the grounds outside. The students were enjoying themselves skating on the frozen lake, tobogganing, and first of all, bewitching Snowball to zoom up to Gryffindor Tower and rap hard on the window. Oi! Lord Ron, finally losing his patience and sticking his head out of the window. I'm a perfect, and if one more snowball hit the window, ouch! He withdrew his head sharply, his face covered in snow. It's Fred and George, he said bitterly, slamming the window behind him. It's Hermione returned from Hagrid just before lunch, shivering slightly, her robes damp to the knees. So, said Ron, looking up when she entered, got all his lessons planned for him. Well, I tried, she said dully, sinking into a chair beside Harry. She pulled out her wand and gave it a complicated little wave so that hot air streamed out of it. She then pointed this at her robes, which began to steam as they dried out. He wasn't even there when I arrived. I was knocking for last half an hour, and then he comes stumping out of the forest. Harry groaned. The forbidden forest was teeming with the kind of creatures most like to get Hagrid the sack. What's he keeping in there? Did he say? Asked Harry. No, said Hermione miserably. He says he wants them to be surprised. I tried to explain about Umbridge, but he just don't get it. He kept saying nobody is their right mind would rather study Nals than chimeras. Oh, I don't think he's got a chimera, she added at the appalled look on Harry and Ron's faces. But that's not for lack of trying from what he said about how hard it is to get egg. I don't know how many times I told him he had be better off following Grubbly Plank's plan. I honestly don't think he listened to half of what I said. He's in a bit of funny mood, you know. He still won't say how he got all those injuries. Hagrid reappeared at the staff table at breakfast next day and was greeted by enthusiasm from all students. Some, like Fred, George, and Lee, roared with delight and sprinted up the alley between the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff table to wring Hagrid's enormous hand. Others, like Parvati and Lavender, exchanged gloomy looks and shook their head. Harry knew that many of them preferred Professor Grubbly Plank's lesson, and the worst of it was that a very small, unbiased part of him knew what they had good reason. Grubbly Plank's idea on an interesting class was not one where there was a risk what somebody might have their hair ripped off. It was with a certain amount of apprehension that Harry, Ron, and Hermione headed down to Hagrid's on Thursday. Heavily muffled against the cold, Harry was worried not only about what Hagrid might have decided to reach them, but also about how the rest of the class, particularly Malfoy and his cronies, would behave if Umbridge was watching them. However, the High Inquisitor was nowhere to be seen as they struggled through the snow toward Hagrid, who stood waiting for them on the edge of the forest. It did not present a reassuring sight. The breezes that had been purple on Saturday night were now tinged with green and yellow, and some of his cut still seemed to be bleeding. Harry could not understand this. Had Hagrid perhaps been attacked by some creature whose venom prevented the wound in inflected from healing, as though to complete the ominous picture. Hagrid was carrying what looked like a half-dead cow over his shoulder. "We have one king in there today," Hagrid called happily to the approaching student, jerking his head back at the dark tree behind him. "Bit more sheltered, anyway. They prefer the dark." "What prefer the dark?" Harry heard Malfoy say sharply to Grab and Goyle, a trace of panic in his voice. "What did he say? Prefers the dark? Did you hear?" Harry remembered the only occasion on which Malfoy had entered the forest before now. He had not been very brave then either. He smiled to himself after the Quidditch match. Anything that caused Malfoy discomfort was all right with him. "Ready?" said Hagrid happily, looking around at the class. "Right, or I have been saving a trip into the forest for you fifth year. Thought we had go and see these creatures in their natural habitat. Now, what we are studying today is pretty rare. I reckon I am probably the only person in Britain who's managed to train them." "You are sure they are trained, are you?" said Malfoy, the panic in his voice even more pronounced now. "Only it wouldn't be the first time you had brought wild stuff to the class, wouldn't it?" The Slytherins murmured agreed, and a few Gryffindor looked as though they thought Malfoy had a fair point too. "Course they are trained," said Hagrid, scrolling and hoisting the dead cow a little higher on his shoulder. "So what happened to your face then?" demanded Malfoy. "Mind your own business," said Hagrid angrily. "Now, if you have finished asking stupid questions, follow me." He turned and strode straight into the forest. Nobody seemed much disposed to follow. Harry glanced at Ron and Hermione, who sighed but nodded, and the three of them set off after Hagrid, leading the rest of the class. They walked for about 10 minutes until they reached a place where the trees stood so closely together that it was dark as twilight, and there was no snow on the ground at all. Hagrid deposited his half cow with a grunt on the ground, stepped back, and turned to face the class again, most of whom were creeping toward him from tree to tree, peering around nervously as though expecting to be set upon at any moment. Gather around," said Hagrid encouragingly. "Now they'll be attracted by the smell of the meat, but I am going to give them a call anyway, 'cause they'll like to know it's me." He turned, shook his shaggy head to get the hair out of his face, and gave an odd, shrinking cry that echoed through the dark trees like the call of some monstrous bird. Nobody laughed; most of them looked too scared to make a sound. Grid gave the shrinking cry again. A minute passed in which the class continued to peer nervously over their shoulders and around trees for the first glimpse of whatever it was that was coming, and then, as Hagrid shook his hair back for a third time and expanded his enormous chest, Harry nudged Ron and pointed into the black space between two general young trees. Pair of black, white, shining eyes were growing larger through the gloom, and a mountain later, the dragonish faced snake and the skeleton body of a great black winged horse emerged from the darkness. It looked around at the class for a few seconds, swishing. It looked back pale, then bowed its head and began to tear flesh from the dead cow with its pointing fang. A great wave of relief broke over Harry. Here, at least, was a proof that he had not imagined these creatures, that they were real. Hagrid knew about them too. He looked eagerly at Ron. But Ron was still staring around into the trees, and after a few seconds he whispered, "Why doesn't Hagrid call again?" Most of the rest of the class were wearing expression of confused and nervously expecting as Ron's and were still gazing everywhere but at the horse standing feet from them. There were only two other people who seemed to be able to see them. A stringy slithering boy standing just behind Goyle was watching the horse eating with an expression of great distance on his face, and Neville, whose eyes were following the swishing progress of the long black tail. "Oh, then here come another one," said Hagrid proudly, as a second black horse appeared out of the dark trees, folded its lengthy wings closer to its body, and drooped its head to charge on the meadow. "Put your hands up, who can see them?" Immensely pleased to feel that he was at least going to understand the mystery of these horses, Harry raised his hand. Hagrid nodded at him. Yeah, I know. You'd be able to, Harry, he said seriously. "And you too, Neville." And excuse me, said Malfoy in a sneering voice, "but what exactly are we supposed to be seeing?" For answer, Hagrid pointed at the cow carcass on the ground. The whole class stared at it for a few seconds, then several people gasped and Parvati squealed. Harry understood why. Bits of lace stripping themselves away from the bones and vanishing onto thin air had to look very odd indeed. "What's doing it?" Parvati demanded in a terrified voice, retreating behind the nearest tree. "What's eating it?" "Thistle," said Hagrid proudly, and Hermione gave a soft "oh" of comprehension at Harry's shoulder. "Hogwarts has got a whole herd of them in here. Now, who knows? But they are really unlucky," interrupted Parvati, looking alarmed. "They are supposed to bring all sort of horrible misfortune on the people who see them. Professor Trelawney told me once." "No, no, no, no," said Hagrid, chuckling. "That's just superstition. That is, they aren't unlucky. They are dead clever and useful. Course, these lots don't get a lot of work. It's mainly just pulling the school carriage, usually Dumbledore's taking a long journey and don't want to operate, and here another couple look. Two more horses come quietly out of the tree, one of them passing very close to Parvati, who shivered and pressed herself close to tree, saying, "I think I felt something. I think it's near me. Don't worry, it won't hurt you," said Hagrid patiently. "Right. Now, who can tell me why some of you can see them and some can't?" Hermione raised her hand. "Go on then," said Hagrid, beaming at her. "The only people who can see thistles," she said, "are people who have seen death." "That's exactly right," said Hagrid solemnly. 10 points to Gryffindor. Now thistles. Professor Umbridge had arrived. She was standing a few feet away from Harry, wearing her green hat and cloak again, her keyboard at the ready. Hagrid, who had never heard Umbridge speak before, was gazing in some concern at the closest threshold, evidently under the impression that it had made the sound. "Oh, hello," Hagrid said, smiling, having located the source of noise. "You received the note I sent you." "What happened this morning?" said Umbridge. In the smell dark, no right, she smiled with him as though she was addressing somebody foreign "Oh, yeah," said Hagrid brightly. "Glad you found the place all right. Well, as you can see, or I don't know, can you? You are doing wrestle today." "I'm sorry," said Umbridge loudly, cupping her hand around her ear and frowning. "What did you say?" Harry looked a little confused. Trestle, he said loudly. Big winged horse, you know. He flapped his giant arm hopefully. Mr. Umbridge raised her eyebrow at him and muttered as she made a note on her clipboard. Has to resort to crude sign language anyway, said Hagrid, turning back to the class and looking slightly flustered. What was I saying? Appeared to have poor short-term memory, muttered Umbridge, loudly enough for everyone to hear her. Draco Malfoy looked as though Christmas had come a month early. Hermione, on the other hand, had turned scarlet with suppressed rage. "Oh yes," said Hagrid, throwing an uneasy glance at Umbridge's clipboard, but flowing on valiantly. "Yea, I was going to tell you how come got a herd. Yea, so we started off with a male and 5 female. This one, he patted the first horse to have appeared, named O'Tannerbrus. He's my special favorite. First one born here in the forest. Are you aware? Umbridge said loudly, interrupting thinking that the Ministry of Magic had classified threshers as dangerous. Harry's heart sank into a stone, but Hagrid merely chuckled. Threshers aren't dangerous, all right. They might take a bit out you if you really annoy them. Show sign of pleasure at idea of violence, muttered Umbridge, scribbling on her clipboard again. "No, come on," said Hagrid, looking a little anxious now. "I mean, a dog will bite if you bit it, won't it? But threshers have just got a bad reputation because of the death thing. People used to think they were bad omen, didn't they? Just didn't understand, did they?" Umbridge did not answer. She finished writing her last note, then looked up at Hagrid and said again, very loudly and slowly, "Please continue teaching as usual. I am going to walk." She mimed walking. Malfoy and Pansy Parkinson were having silent fit of laughter. Among the students, she pointed around at individual member of the class and asked them questions. She pointed at her mouth to indicate talking. Hagrid started her cleared at a complete lesson to understand why she was acting as though he did not understand normal English. Hermione had tear of fury in her eyes now. "You hag, you evil hag," she whispered as Umbridge walked toward Pansy Parkinson. "I know what you are doing. You awful, twisted, vicious. Anyway," said Hagrid, clearly struggling to regain the flow of his lesson. "So thresholds, yeah, well, there is lots of good stuff about them. We found," said Professor Umbridge in a ringing voice to Pansy Parkinson, "that you are able to understand Professor Hagrid when he talks." Just like Hermione, Pansy had tears in her eyes. But these were tears of laughter. Indeed, her answer was almost incoherent because she was trying to suppress her giggle. "Oh, because well, it sounds like grunting a lot of time." Aubrey scribbled on her clipboard. The few unbrushed bites of Hagrid's face flushed, but he tried to act as though he had not heard Pansy's answer. Yeah, good stuff about thresholds. Well, once they are teamed like this lot, you'll have be lost again. Imagine sense of direction. Just tell them where you want to go. Assuming they can understand you, of course, said Malfoy loudly, and Pansy Parkinson collapsed in a fit of renewed giggles. Professor Umbridge smiled indulgently at them and then turned to Neville. "You can see the Thresher's long bottom, can you?" she said. Neville nodded. "Whom did you say died?" she asked, her tone indifferent. My granddad," said Neville. "And what do you think of them?" she said, waving her stubby hand at the horse, who by now had stripped a great deal of the carcass down to bone. Said Neville nervously with a glance at Hagrid. Well, they are okay. Students are too intended to admit they are frightened, but Umbridge making another note on her clipboard. No, said Neville, looking upset. No, I'm not scared of them. It's quite all right, said Umbridge, patting Neville on the shoulder with what she evidently intended to be understanding smile, though it looked more like a leer to Harry. Well, Hagrid, she turned to look up at him again, speaking once more in that loud, slow voice. I think I have got enough to be getting along with. You will receive, she mimed, taking something from the ear in front of her, the result of your inspection. She pointed at the clipboard. In 10 days' time, she held up 10 stubble little fingers, then a smile wider and more toad-like than ever before. Beneath a green hat, she bustled from their midst, leaving Malfoy and Pansy Parkinson in fit of laughter. Hermione actually shaking with fury and Neville looking confused and upset. That foul-lying, twisted old gargoyle stormed Hermione half an hour later as they made their way back to the castle through the channel they had made earlier in the snow. You can see what she's up to. It's her thing about half-breed all over again. She's trying to make out Hagrid some kind of dim-witted troll just because he had a giantess for a mother. Oh, it's not fair. That really wasn't a bad lesson at all. I mean, alright, it had been blasted scribbles again, but threshers are fine. In fact, for Hagrid, they are really good. Umbridge said they are dangerous, said Ron. Well, it's like Hagrid said they can look after themselves, said Hermione impatiently. And I suppose to teach like Doubly Plank wouldn't usually show them to us before an EWT level, but well, they are very interesting, aren't they? The way some people can see them and some can't. I wish I could. Do you? Harry asked her quietly. She looked horror struck. Oh, Harry, I'm sorry. No, of course I don't. That was a really stupid thing I say. It's okay, he said quietly. Don't worry, I'm surprised so many people could see them, said Ron. Three in class. Yeah, Weasley, we were just wondering, said a malicious voice nearby. Unheard by any of them in the muffling snow. Malfoy, Grab, and Goyle were walking along right behind them. Do you recall if you saw someone snuff it, you had been able to see the puffle beater? He and Goyle rolled with laughter as they pushed past on their way to castle and then broke into shouts of Weasley is our king. Ron's ear turned scarlet. Ignore them, just ignore them, intoned Hermione, pulling out her wand and performing the charm to produce hot air again, so that she could melt them an easier path through the untouched snow between them and the greenhouse. December arrived, bringing with it more snow and a positive avalanche of homework for the fifth years. Ron and Hermione's perfect duties were also become more and more onerous as Christmas approached. They were called upon to supervise the decoration of the castle. You tried to putting up tinsel when Pius has got others and it's time to strangle you with it, said Ron. To watch over first and second year spending their breaks time inside because of a bitter cold. And they are cheeky like Snowtrage. You know we definitely weren't that rude when we are in first year, said Ron, and to patrol the corridor in shifts with Argus Fleet, who suspected that the holiday spirit might show itself in an outbreak of wizard duel. He's got a dung for a brain, that one, said Ron furiously. They were so busy that Hermione had stopped Nightingale's hat and was pleading that she was done to her last three. All those poor elves I haven't set free yet, having to stay over during Christmas because there aren't enough hats. Harry, who had not had the heart to tell her that Dobby was taking everything she made, met lower history of magic essay in an easy he did not want to think about Christmas. For the first time in his school career, he very much wanted to spend the holiday away from Hogwarts. Between his Quidditch ban and worry about whether or not Hagrid was going to be put on prohibition, he felt highly resentful toward the place at the moment. The only thing he really looked forward to were the DA meetings, and they would have to stop over the holidays as nearly everybody in the DA would be spending the time with their families. Harmony was going skiing with her parents, something that greatly amused Ron, who had never before heard of muggles strapping narrow strip of wood to their feet to slide down mountains. Ron, meanwhile, was going home to the bureau. Harry endured several days of jealousy before Ron said, in the response to Harry asking how Ron was going to get home for Christmas, "But you are coming too, didn't I say? Mum wrote and told me to invite you weeks ago." Hermione rolled her eyes, but Harry's spirit soared. The thought of Christmas at the Burrow was truly wonderful, only slight marred by Harry's guilty feeling that he would not be able to spend the holiday with Cyrus. He wondered whether he could possibly persuade Mrs. Weasley to invite his godfather for the festivities too, but apart from the fact that he doubted whether Dumbledore would permit Cyrus to leave Grimmauld Place, he could not help but feel that Mrs. Weasley might not want him. They were so often at Lockhart, Cyrus had not contacted Harry at all since the last appearance in the fire, and although Harry knew that with Umbridge on the constant watch, it would be unwise to attempt to contact him, he did not like to think of Cyrus alone in his mother's old house, perhaps pulling a lonely cracker with Creature. Harry arrived early in the room of the requirement for the DA meeting before the holiday and was very glad he had because when the lamps burst into light, he saw that Dobby had taken it upon himself to decorate the place for Christmas. He could tell the elf had done it because nobody else would have strung 100 golden bubbles from the ceiling, each showing a picture of Harry's face and bearing the legend and a very Harry Christmas. Harry had only just managed to get the last of them out before the door kept open and Luna vaguely looking around at what remained of the decoration. "These are nice. Did you put them up?" "No," said Harry. "It was Dobby, the house elf." "Stole toy," said Luna dreamily, pointing at a large clump of white berries planted almost over Harry's head. "He jumped out from the under it good thinking," said Luna very seriously. "It's often infested with nagurgles." Harry was saved the necessity of asking what Nargles were by the arrival of Angelina, Katy, and Alicia. All three of them were breathless and looked very cold. "Well," said Angelina, dully pulling off her cloak and throwing it into a corner. "We have replaced you." "Replace me," said Harry blankly. "You and Fred and George," she said impatiently. "You have got another seeker." "Who?" said Harry quickly. "Ginny Weasley," said Katy. Harry gaped at her. "Yeah, I know," said Angelina, pulling out her wand and fixing her arms. "But she's pretty good. Actually, nothing on you, of course," she said, throwing him a very dirty look. "But As we can't have you, Harry beat back the retort he had longing to utter. Did she imagine for a second that he did not regret his expulsion from the team 100 times more than she did? And what about the beater? He asked, trying to keep his voice even. Andrew Carkey, said Alicia without enthusiasm, and Jack Slober. Neither of them are brilliant, but compared to the rest of the idiot who turned up, the arrival of Ron, Hermione, and Neville brought the depressing discussion to the end, and in 5 minutes the room was full enough to prevent him seeing Angelina burning the approachful look. Okay, he said, sealing them all to order. I thought this evening we should just go over the things we have done so far because it's last meeting before the holiday and there are no point starting anything new right before 3 weeks break. We are not going anything new, said Zasharin Spade in a disgruntled whisper, loud enough to carry through the room. If I had known that I wouldn't have come. We are really sorry we didn't tell you then, said Fred loudly. Several people sniggered. Harry saw Cho laughing and felt the similar swelling sensation in his stomach as though he had missed a step going downstairs. We can practice in Paris. Yes, said Harry. We'll start with the impediments, Jinx. Just for 10 minutes, then we can get out the potion and try stunning again. They all divided up obediently. Harry partnered Neville as usual. The room was soon full of intermittent cries of impediments. People froze for a minute or so, during which their partners would stare aimlessly around the room, watching another pair of work. Then would unfreeze and take their turn to jinx. Neville had improved beyond all recognition after a while. When Harry had unfrozen 3 times in a row, he had never joined Ron and Hermione again so that he could walk around and the room and was the other. When he passed Chow, she beamed at him. He resisted the temptation to walk past her several more times. After 10 minutes on the impediment, Jinx, they lied out cautions all over the floor and started practicing stunning again. Space was really too confined to allow them all to work their spell at once. Half of the group observed the others for a while. When swept over, Harry felt himself positively swelling with pride as he watched them all. True Neville did stun Padma Patil rather than Dean, at whom he had been aiming, but was a much closer miss than usual, and everybody else had made enormous progress. At the end of an hour, Harry yelled a halt. You are getting really good, he said, beaming around at them. When we get back from the holiday, we can start doing some of big stuff, maybe even Patronus. There was a murmur of excitement. Then room began to clear in usual twos and threes. Most people wished Harry a happy Christmas as they went, feeling cheerful. He collected up the cushions with Ron and Hermione and staked them nearly away. Ron and Hermione left before he did. He hung back a little because Chow was still there, and he was hoping to receive a Merry Christmas from her. No, you go on, he heard her say to her friends, Barita, and had heard give a jolt of seemed to take onto a region of Adam apples. He pretended to bring straightening caution pile. He was quite sure they were alone now and waited for her to speak. Instead, he heard the party sniff. He turned and saw Chow standing in the middle of the room, tearing pouring down her face. What? She didn't know what to do. She was simply standing there, crying silently. Sir, he said feebly. She shook her head and wiped her eyes on her sleeves. I'm sorry, she said thickly. I suppose it's just learning all this stuff. It makes just me wonder whether if he had known it all, he had still be alive. And his heart sank right back, passed into usual spot, and settled somewhere around his navel. He ought to have known she wanted to talk about Cedric. He did know this stuff, Harry said heavily. He was really good at it, or he could never have got to the middle of the maze. But if Voldemort really wanted to kill you, you don't stand a chance. She hiccuped at the sound of Voldemort's name, but stared at Harry without flinching. You survived when you were just a baby, she said quietly. Yeah, well, said wearily, moving toward the door. I don't know why, nor does anyone else, so it's nothing to be proud of. Oh, don't go, said Chow, sounding tearful again. I'm really sorry to get all upset like this. I didn't mean to. She hiccuped again. She was very pretty even when her eyes were red and puffy. Harry felt thoroughly miserable. He had have been so pleased just with Merry Christmas. I know it must be horrible for you, she said, mopping her eyes on her sleeves again. Me mentioning Cedric when you saw him die. I suppose you just wanted to forget about it. Harry did not say anything to this. It was quite true, but he felt heartless saying it. You are really a good teacher, you know, said Chow with a watery smile. I have never been able to stung anything before. Thanks, said Harry awkwardly. They looked at each other for a long moment. Harry felt a burning desire to run from the room and at the same time a complete inability to move his feet. Pistol toy, said Chow quickly, pointing at the ceiling over his head. Yes, said Harry. His mouth was very dry. It's probably full of nargles, though. What are nargles? No idea, said Harry. She had moved closer. His brain seemed to have been stunned. You have to ask Luna. Luna, I mean. Chow made a funny noise halfway between sob and laugh. She was even near him now. He could have counted freckles on her nose. I really like you, Harry. He could not think a tingling sensation was spreading throughout him, paralyzing his arm, legs, and brain. She was too much too close. He could see every tear clinging to her eyelashes. He returned to the common room half an hour later to find Harmony and Ron in the best seat by the fire. Nearly everybody else had gone to bed. Harmony was writing a long, long letter. She had already filled half of the roll of parchment, which was dangling from the edge of the table. Ron was lying on the hearthrug, trying to finish his transfiguration homework. What kept you? He asked as Harry sank into an armchair next to Hermione. Harry did not answer. He was in the state of shock. Half of him wanted to tell Ron and Hermione what had just happened, but the other half wanted to take the secret with him to give. Are you alright, Harry? Hermione asked, peering at her over a tip of her quill. Harry gave a half-hearted shrug. In the truth, I didn't know whether he was alright or not. What's up? Said Ron, hoisting himself up on his elbow to get clearly view of Harry. What happened? Harry didn't quite know how to say it about telling them and still wasn't sure whether he wanted to, just as he had decided not to say anything. Hermione took matter out of his hand. Is it Chow? She asked in a businesslike way. Did she corner you after the meeting? Numbly surprised, Harry nodded. Ron's struggle breaking out the harmonies caught his eyes. So, what did she want? He asked in a mock casual voice. She, Harry began rather hoarsely. He cleared his throat and tried again. Did you kiss? Asked Hermione briskly. Ron sat up so fast that he sat in an ink bottle flying all over the rug, disgrading but completely. He stared Well, he demanded. Harry looked from Ron's expression of mingled curiosity and hilarity to Hermione's slight frown and nodded. Ha! Ron made a tired gesture with his fist and went into ridiculous peal of laughter that made several timid-looking second year over beside the window jump. A reluctant grin spread over Harry's face as he watched Ron rolling around the hearthrug. Hermione gave Ron a look of deep disgust and returned to her letter. Well, Ron said finally, looking up at Harry, how was it? Harry considered for a moment. Wait, he said truthfully. Ron made a noise that might have indicated rebellion or disgust. It was hard to tell because she was crying. Harry continued heavily. Oh, said Ron, his smile fading slightly. Are you that bad at kissing? Don't know, said Harry, who hadn't considered his aunt immediately felt rather worried. Maybe I am. Of course you are not, said Hermione absently, still scribbling away at her letter. How do you know? Said Ron in her sharp voice. Because Chow spent half her time crying these days, said Hermione vaguely. She does it at mealtime in the loo, all over the place. You had think a bit of kissing will cheer her up, said Ron, grinning. Ron, said Hermione in dignified voice, dimping the point at her. Well into her inkpot, you are the most incentive wart I have ever had the misfortune to meet. What's that supposed to mean? Said Ron intelligently. What sort of person cry while someone's kissing them? Yeah, said Harry slightly desperately. Who's does? Hermione looked at her pair of them with an almost pitying expression on her face. Do you understand how Chow is feeling at the moment? She asked. No, said Harry and Ron together. Hermione sighed. Her laid down her quill. Well, obviously, she's feeling very sad because of Cedric's dying. Then I expect her feeling confused because she likes Cedric and now she likes Harry. And she can't work out who she likes the best. Then she'll be feeling guilty, thinking it's an insult to Cedric's memory to be kissing Harry at all. And she'll be worrying about what everyone else might say about her if she starts going out with Harry, and she probably can't work out what her feeling toward Harry after anyone because he was the one who was with Cedric when Cedric died. So that's all very mixed up and painful. Oh, and she is afraid she is going to be thrown off Ravenclaw's Quidditch team because she's been flying so badly. A slightly stunned silence greeted the end of the speech. Then Ron said one person can't feel all that at once. They had explored. Just because you have got the emotional range of teaspoon doesn't mean you all have, said Hermione nastily, picking up her quill again. She was the one who started it, said Harry. I wouldn't have. She just sort to came at me, and next thing she is crying all over me. I didn't know what to do. Don't blame you, maid, said Ron, looking alarmed at the very thought. You just had to be nice to her, said Hermione, looking up anxiously. You were, weren't you? Well, said Harry, an unpleasant heat creeping up his face. I sort of patted her on the back a bit. Hermione, looking at, thought she was restraining herself from rolling her eyes with extreme difficulty. Well, I suppose it would have been worse, she said. Are you going to see her again? I'll have to, won't I? Said Harry. We have got DM meeting, haven't we? You know what I mean, said Hermione impatiently. Harry said nothing. Hermione's world opened up a wild new vista of frightening possibility. Tried to imagine going somewhere with Chow, Hogsmeade perhaps, and being alone with her for hours at a time. Of course, she would have been expecting him to ask her out after what had just happened. The thought made his stomach clench painfully. "Oh well," said Hermione distantly, buried in her letter once more. "You'll have plenty of opportunity to ask her." "What if he doesn't want to ask her?" said Ron, who had been watching Harry with an unusual screwed expression on his face. "Don't be silly," said Hermione vaguely. "Harry liked her for ages, haven't you, Harry?" He did not answer. Yes, he had liked Chow for ages, but whenever he had imagined a scene involving the two of them, it had always featured a Chow who was enjoying herself and opposed to Chow who was sobbing uncontrollably onto his shoulder. "Why are you writing the novel to anyway?" Ron asked Hermione, trying to read the bit of parchment now drilling the floor. Hermione hitched it out beside Victor Crumb. "How many other Victor do you know?" Ron said nothing but looked disgruntled. They sat in silence for another 20 minutes, Ron finishing his transfiguration essay with any sort of impatience and tossing out Hermione's writing steadily to the very end of parchment, rolling it up carefully and sealing it, and Harry staring into fire, wishing more than anything that Cyrus had would appear there and give him some advice about girls. But the fire merely cracked lower, lower until the red hot embers crumbled into ash, and looking around, Harry saw that they were yet again the last in the common room. "All night," said Hermione, yawning badly, as she set off up the girls' staircase. "What does she see in Crumb?" Ron demanded as he and Harry climbed the boys' stairs. "Well," said Harry, considering the matter, "I suppose he's older, isn't he? And he's international quidditch player." "Yeah, but apart from that," said Ron, sounding aggravated, "I mean, he's a grouchy git, isn't he?" "Bit grouchy, yeah," said Harry, whose thoughts were still on Chow. They pulled off their robes and put on pajamas in silence. Dean Seamus and Neville were already asleep. Harry put his glass on his bedside table and got into bed, did not pull the hanging clothes around his four-poster. Instead, he stared at the patch of steady sky visible through the window next to Neville's bed. They had known the time last night that in 24 hours' time he would have kissed Chao Chang. "Night," grunted Ron from somewhere to his right. "Night," said Harry. "Maybe next time." If there was a next time, she had been a bit happier. He ought to have asked her out. She had probably been expecting it, and what now really angry with him? Or was she lying in bed still crying about Cedric? He did not know what to think. Hermione's explanation had made it all seem more complicated rather than easier to understand. That's what they should teach us. Here, he thought, turning over onto side, how girls' brain work. It's more useful than deviation anyway. Neville snuffed in his sleep. An owl hooted somewhere out in the night. Harry dreamed he was back in the room. Chow was accusing him for ruling her there under false pretense. She said that she had promised her 150 chocolate frog card if she showed up. Harry protested. Chow shouted, "Cedric gave me lots of chocolate frog card, look." And he pulled out fistful of cards from inside her robes and threw them onto her, and then turned into Hermione, who said, "You did promise her, you know, Harry. I think you had better give her something else instead. How about your firebolt?" And Harry was protesting that he could not give Cho his firebolt because Umbridge had it. And anyway, the whole thing was ridiculous. He had only come to the room to put up some Christmas bubble shaped like Dobby's head. The dream changed. His body felt smooth, powerful, and flexible. He was gliding between shining metal bars across dark, cold stone. He was flat against the floor, sliding along on his belly. It was dark, yet could see objects around him, shimmering his strange, vibrant color. He was turning his head. At first glance, the corridor was empty, and no, a man was sitting on the floor ahead, his chin dropping onto his chest, his outline gleaming in his dark. Harry put out his tongue. He tasted the man's scent on the air. He was alive but drowsing, sitting in front of a door at the end of corridor. Harry loved to beat the man, but he was mastered the impulse. He had more important work to do, but the man was staring a silvery clock fell from his leg as he jumped to his feet, and Harry saw his vibrant blood outline towering him, saw a wand withdrawn from the belt. He had no choice. He reared high from the floor and struck once, twice, 3 times, plunging his fang deeply into the man's flesh, feeling his ribs splinter beneath his jaw, feeling the warmth gush of blood. The man was yelling in pain, then he fell silent. He slumped backward against the wall. Blood was splatting onto door. His forehead hurt terribly. It was aching, his burst. Hurry, hurry. He opened his eyes. Every inch of his body was covered in icy sweat. His bed covers were twisted all around him like a stair jacket. He felt as though a white hot poker was being applied on his forehead. Harry. Ron was standing over him looking extremely frightened. There were no fingers at the foot of Harry's bed. He clenched his head in his hand, pain and blinding him. He rolled right over, vomiting over the edge of the matter. His relief heard a scared voice. You'll recall someone, Harry, Harry. Taking a great gulp of air, Harry pushed himself up in bed, willing himself not to throw up again. The pain half blinding him. "Your dad," he panted, his chest having "your dad's been attacked." "What?" said Ron, uncomprehendingly. "Your dad. He's been beaten. It's serious." There was blood everywhere. "I'm going for help," said the same scared voice. Said Harry, heard footsteps running out of the dormitory. "Harry, mate," said Ron uncertainly. "You were just dreaming." "No," said Harry furiously. It was crucial that Ron understand it wasn't dream, not an ordinary dream. "I was there. I saw it. I did it." He could hear Seamus Dean muttering, but did not care. The pain in his forehead was subsiding slightly, though he was still sweating and shivering feverishly. He reached again, and Ron leapt backward out of the way. "Harry, you are not well," he said shakily. "Neville's gone for help." "I'm fine." Harry walked, wiped his mouth off his pajama and shaking uncomfortably. "There is nothing wrong with me. It's your dad you have got to worry about. We need to find out where he is. He's bleeding like mad." It was a huge snake. He tried to get out of bed, but Ron pushed him back onto it. Dean and Seamus were still whispering somewhere nearby. Where 1 minute passed or 10, Harry did not know. He simply sat there shaking, feeling the pain recede very slowly from his scalp. Then there were hurried footsteps coming up the stair, and heard Neville's voice again. "Oh, here, Professor. Professor McGonagall come hurrying into the dormitory in her patterned dressing gown. Her glasses perched lopsidedly on the bridge of her bony nose. What is it, Potter? Where does it hurt? I had never been so pleased to see her. It was a member of Order of Phoenix he needed now, not someone fussing over him and pretending endless potions. It's Ron's dad, he said, sitting up again. He's been attacked by a snake and it's serious. I saw it happen. What do you mean? You saw it happen, said Professor McGonagall, her dark eyebrow contracting. I don't know, I was asleep, and then I saw I was there. You mean you dreamed this? No, said Harry angrily. Would none of them understand I was having a dream at first about something completely different, something stupid, and then this interrupted it. It was real. I didn't imagine it. Mr. Weasley was asleep on the floor and he was attacked by a giant snake. There was a loud of blood. He collapsed. Someone's got to find out where he is. Professor McGonagall was gazing at him through her lopsided spectacle as though horrified at what she was seeing. I'm not lying. I'm not mad, Harry told her, his voice rising to a shout. I tell you, I saw it happen. I believe you, Potter, said Professor McGonagall curtly. Put on your dressing gown. We are going to see the headmaster. That's it for today. Stay. Thank you for. Stay tuned for next chapter.